We are live. Welcome. Oh, sorry. So now we're being recorded. Welcome to the Californians for the Arts webinar on California Venues Program Round 2. I think we've got most everybody here. So instead of waiting for more to log in, I'm going to go ahead and dive in because we have a lot of information to cover and I want to be sure and leave time at the end for your questions. So just a little housekeeping. If you can go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat and include your land acknowledgement. I've also included at the top of the chat some useful links, and we will continue to post those throughout. All of this information that you're about to have, the webinar is being recorded. You will get a link to the recording of the webinar, the slide deck, the Q&A, all of the links. So don't feel like you have to memorize everything that happens and take copious notes. Listen, take in the information, and you'll get it all as resources. All right, so starting, the most important thing in those links is my email. And so let me introduce myself. My name is Terry Ball. I am the grants manager here at Californians for the Arts. I'm also an arts manager. I run, in addition to my duties with Californians for the Arts, I'm the executive director for Center Stage Theater in Santa Barbara, which is a 130-seat black box nonprofit rental venue. I say that so that you know, I know where you're coming from. I understand the challenges. I have been running various performing arts organizations in different roles for about 30 years now. So I get it. I understand how hard your life is and how challenging of a position you're in right now. I am coming to you today from Santa Barbara, the unceded lands of the Chumash people. The Californians for the Arts and Californians Arts Advocates is advocacy organizations. Californians for the Arts is the direct advocacy organization, and we work in tandem with Californians Arts Advocates, which is your direct lobbying voice in Santa Barbara, in Sacramento, not in Santa Barbara. These organizations are very important in that these are the folks that are advocating to make programs like this possible. Did you see that transition there? So we're doing membership right now, and it is our memberships in Californians for the Arts and California Arts Advocates that makes programs like this support free. So if you would like to consider a membership, the link is there, and it is greatly appreciated. Okay, now you can go on, Eddie. A little bit of context, transitioning from the importance of advocacy. The California Venues Grant Program came about because of advocacy from groups like Californians for the Arts and NEVA California and Cal Nonprofits and the voices of the industry, both nonprofit and for-profit, the cultural economy industry coming together and saying, we were really, really hard hit by COVID and we need some unique assistance. And the result of that advocacy was that the legislature listened and passed this program, and the governor signed it, and they then go to the nuts and bolts of the grant are all spelled out in the legislation, including who in the state government will run the program. In this case, that's Cal OSBA. Cal OSBA then hires an organization to physically administer the program. In this case, that's Lindustry. We have some of our friends from Lindustry on the call with us today. They are then in charge of administering the program. Many of you may have worked with Lindustry if you applied for either the California Relief Grant or the California Nonprofit Performing Arts Grant. Lindustry then hires contracts with some partners like ourselves who know the industry. So we have the contacts, we understand your side of it. And so we are here to help make sure everybody knows about the program. We are here to help answer questions and offer technical assistance. We at Californians for the Arts do not have any direct interaction with your grant. We do not evaluate the grants. We do not make any decisions about the grants. We do not have access to your direct grant. We are here to answer questions Before you apply, we are here to answer questions and assist you as we go through the process. I like to think of it this way. Those of us who work in the arts have all had the communications with our various family members at Christmas and Thanksgiving, where for years and years you've tried to explain to them what you do. And still probably most of them don't really understand. Well, that's part of what we're here for, because the people at Lindustry and at Cal OSBA are wonderful people and very wise, and they know their business very well. When it comes to theaters and the difference between a producer and a presenter and who works backstage and what are these different organizations, they're less experienced. So we're here to try to help bridge that gap, to help you understand them and them understand you. Okay, so moving on. The one other thing I did want to point out, and part of the reason that I gave that background is, unlike some grant programs that are done by local foundations or local government, this grant program, as I said, was set up by a piece of legislation. And the legislators spell out what the rules are about the grant. What that means is there's very little flexibility in changing anything. No program is perfect, but to understand going in that this is not something like if a local foundation was doing a grant or the California Arts Council, and once you start it, you realize, oh, this question isn't really working right, or this element of the program. Those organizations, because they're locally based, have a lot more flexibility to decide, oh, let's shift and maybe make this change. Because this program is based in legislation, those kinds of changes require more legislation. So that is to say, if Lindustry can't work with you and bend in a way that you're hoping they could, it's not that the people on the other end don't want to, it's that they don't have the power to. The rules and regulations about this grant are cast in stone by the legislation. So that's just a little bit different, and I like people to understand that. Here's what we're going to do today. As I mentioned, please put your questions into the Q&A instead of the chat, because that makes it easier for us to find them. At the end, I will go through all of the questions. And if we run out of time and don't get to all of the questions, we will, either way, you'll get a copy of the questions with written answers. There's a lot of information here, and there's even more information today because we've gotten some visuals of the actual application. What that means is I'm not going to read everything that we put on the screen. However, there's a lot of valuable information here, and I strongly, strongly encourage you to not consider this webinar the be-all and end-all of your preparation for applying for this grant. The application guide, as we will show it to here, is available on the Cal Venues website, which is in the chat, and I will put it in again. This webinar, the slide deck, and the Q&A will all be available for you after the webinar. There's lots of detailed information. Use it. If you have any questions that don't get answered, or as you go through the process, if you take nothing else with you today, take my email, which is there on the screen now. It's also in the chat, and we will send it along later. There is also a phone number for me. I will tell you it is much quicker and easier for me to reply to emails than to phone. And that is two reasons. One, I can reply to emails at 2 o'clock in the morning, and most people don't appreciate phone calls at that time. The other thing is, in an email, I can take your information, and it's very easily right there for me to see what your question is, see what your organization is, and then I can write you back the information. So again, you have a written copy of the comments and what you need to do. Doesn't mean I won't answer phone calls. It doesn't mean if you want to call that you're not allowed to or anything. I'm happy to. I just tell you that the way I work, email is better for me than phone. Okay, next. Couple important things to remember. Most important, if you applied to the California Venues Grant in the first round, which was last October, November, December, you cannot apply again. If you got a grant, you can't apply. If you applied and were declined or have never had a resolution, you cannot apply again. What you need to do, if you're not sure, or if you know that you didn't get funded last time and you think you might be eligible with the new changed requirements, send me an email. Let's look up your grant and see where you're at. If you apply again, it's going to see 2 applications in the system and it's going to automatically kick you out. So when in doubt, email me and let's find out what your status is. And we are still working through some of the grants from the first round. If you, okay, the application portal is currently open and it will close January 31st. This grant is reviewed, prioritized based on the percentage of loss, not on first come, first served basis. There is no gold star for the timeliness of your submission. I wouldn't necessarily wait till the last day in case there's a big flood, but there is no reason to feel like you have to rush to get your application in, because they will be reviewed, prioritized based on the percentage of loss. That application, there's sort of a cursory review that goes on when you first submit your application. There's some automatic things in the application that might get you rejected immediately. But the main review of the grants will not begin until February once the application closes. So don't think you're going to get this money before the end of the month. And do not be concerned if you don't hear, other than the confirmation email that you submitted. If you don't hear anything until February, don't panic. That's when the actual review will begin. And then they will begin reviewing the applications based on percentage of loss that you had in 2019 to 2020. Okay, next. In the program overview, it is to support eligible independent live events and venues that have been affected by COVID-19 in order to support their continued operation. The grant award is the lesser of $250,000 or 20% of the applicant's gross earned revenue in California for the 2019 taxable year. This gets a little confusing because some of the financial elements in the grant are based on calendar year and some are based on taxable year. Again, I can't, give you the exact logic for that. What I can tell you is not unlike it's so because mom said. In this case, it's so because that's what the legislation says. So your gross earned revenue, if you operate on a fiscal year that is separate from your calendar year, then the grant award is based on your 2019 tax forms, the income that is shown on that tax form. As I said, the prioritization is on your percentage of loss. The percentage of loss is actually based on calendar year. Because we all know that COVID changed things, in order to evaluate and have everybody on the same playing field, Q2 through Q4 of 2019 and Q2 through Q4, so the quarterly second quarter earnings through fourth quarter earnings for 2019 and second quarter earnings through fourth quarter earnings for 2020 will be looked at, and the percentage of loss you had from 2019 to 2020 will in part determine your eligibility, because you have to have at least a 30% loss between those two. And it will also determine the order in which the grants are reviewed and filled. So like I say, it's a little confusing for those of you on a fiscal year, but you can do it. Okay, next. The application process. The application is going to ask you a lot of questions, and that's going to determine your eligibility. You'll submit the application. As I said, it will have an initial review, and then after February, an individual person will go through each grant, and you will get contacted afterwards if they have questions, if they need different documentation, if something about your documentation they're confused by, and then you will also, everyone has sort of a final confirmation phone call. Okay, next. Another thing to bear in mind is for this grant, if you received a California relief grant, those were done starting in 2021. They were lump sum, 5,000, 10,000, 15,000. If you received one of those grants, then you are eligible to apply for this grant, but the amount of that grant will be subtracted from your award. So if you got a $5,000 California relief grant and your Cal Venues grant would come out to be 20,000, then what you would actually receive will be 15,000 because they're going to take out that relief money you already received. If you applied for the current California Nonprofit Performing Arts Grant, there is no overlap. That's a completely different, that's not a COVID relief program. So that is completely different. Okay. The definition of an eligible venue. Yeah, there you go. Is you have to have a defined audience space and performance space. There has to be some specific equipment that is listed here. You have to engage, and this gets a little confusing, one or more individuals to carry out at least two of the following roles. So there's sound engineer, booker, promoter, stage manager, security personnel, box office manager. But if you're a small organization like mine, you might have one person that is both your sound engineer and your stage manager and your booker or promoter. So it's okay if those roles are combined into one person. What you do have to at least have those roles covered within your organization, within the organization of the venue. The next thing is that you have to be one of the 3 highest revenue grossing entities, locations, or franchises associated with the applicant. If you are a if you own more than one organization and you have a question about this, send me an email. We had originally hoped that this new item that was added in would mean that if you owned multiple venues, you might be able to get multiple grants, but that is not the case. You can still only receive one grant. If you are a venue that is owned or operated by a nonprofit entity that produces free events, the events are produced and managed primarily by paid employees, not by volunteers. This one is slightly confusing, I'm going to tell you, just because that's reality, because one of the requirements is, it's sort of a joint thing here. You have to be an eligible venue that produces eligible events and has eligible events that take place within it, or you have to be an eligible event that takes place within an eligible venue. And one of the requirements for eligible events is that there's a ticket charge. So this particular eligibility point doesn't really come into play, honestly, because for your events to be eligible, you have to charge money for them. So, next. So now we're going on to the eligible live event. And there are a variety of factors here, and you have to meet all of them in one way or another. So the first is, it talks about the kind of organizations that can apply. One of the big things that cannot apply is government entities. So if you are part of a city government, or you're part of a college or university, but you don't have your own separate 990 or tax, you're not going to be able to apply because you have to be able to meet the requirements, and you have to, have your own standalone 990. The next is you have to fall under one of the NAICS or NTE codes that is listed in the legislation. And there's a whole long list of them here. Can you switch over to the next page? So we've got all of the NAICS codes, and then we've got all of the NTE codes. On your tax form, a lot of us, prior to all of this COVID relief, we're not really familiar with NAICS codes and NTE codes. NTE codes are exclusively for nonprofits. The NAICS codes, on your taxes, there is a place where it asks for your business code, and that is in fact your NAICS code. The codes that are listed here in the NAICS codes where you see there are some that only have 4 digits. That means as long as it starts with those 4 digits, any other 2 digits at the end count. And I'm going to tell you right now, we have become aware of a problem for the 2 movie theater and drive-in theater codes. We had this with the first round. We're hoping to get it straightened out with the second round. But one of the things that's true of these NAICS codes is they're kind of, I think of them like nesting dolls. Like, as you can see at the top here, 711-3 is promoters of performing arts, sports, and similar events. Then under that 711-3, you have 310, which is events with facilities, and you have 320, which is events without facilities. Well, one of the fun vagaries of the world is that the IRS system, where your accountant, for those of you who use an accountant, files electronically your taxes, the IRS narrows down these codes and has a tendency to just use the larger groupings. Like, for example, 711-300. Instead of having all the options for 310 and 320, they narrow it down. Unfortunately, when the legislation was written, they went very specific. And so in the case of the movie theater codes, 512131 and 512132 are not codes that the IRS system allows. So what you want to do is make sure when you're looking at your NAICS codes that you are looking at the code that is physically on your 2019 and or 2020 taxes. Because the question is not, what code do you fall under? The question is, what code is on your 2019 or 2020 taxes? If you go and you feel like you should qualify for this program, but you've got a, and in some cases, NAICS codes make no sense at all. It's something an accountant has done once. But if you have an issue with that, send me an email and we can go into it in more depth one-on-one. For the nonprofits, you can check your NTEE code because not all nonprofits use a NAICS code on their 990s. You can check your NTEE code by going online to guidestar.org and your NTEE code will be listed there. Again, if you go and find it and find that it's a code that doesn't make any sense to you, contact me and we can give you some suggestions on how to handle that. Okay, next. So, in addition to being the right kind of an organization and what your code is, you have to be one of the following. So you don't have to be every single thing on this page, but you either have to be somebody that meets that first group, an individual or entity that meets both of the following criteria, or if you come down to the next big one, an individual entity that meets those criteria, or the third. There's a lot of overlap in these. The things that are consistent is your event always has to take place in an eligible venue. The performers have to be paid and there must be an entrance fee. Sorry. I thought I had turned that off. So there are slight differences in the other. The third bullet point here is specifically about sports organizations. The second one changes and makes it that your tickets always have to usually be on sale 30 days in advance. And the one at the top is that 70% of the earned revenue has to be from event-related income, such as ticket sales, production fees, production reimbursements, things that are related to events. So, for example, if you are a restaurant, but you have events maybe 2 months a year or 2 or 3 times a year, then 70% of your income has to come from the revenue around those events. Another good example is if you are a school or a studio and you have tuition, but you also have shows. Well, the shows have to represent 70% of your income, of your gross earned revenue. Versus if 90% of your income comes from tuition for classes, and you only have 10% that comes from your shows, then you're not going to meet this eligibility requirement. Next. Ineligible businesses. Read all the way through this because there are lots of very specifics. Two that I like to point out are you have to generate at least 75% of your gross earned revenue in California. So if you are a multi-state organization, the vast majority of your money, of your income has to be here in California. You also have to demonstrate a percentage gross earned revenue decline in California of at least 30%. And that is, again, based on those reporting periods, Q2 through Q4 of 2020 compared to Q2 through Q4 of 2019, based on the calendar year. Okay, moving on. There are more things here. Read them all. I'm not reading them because they're not important. I'm reading them so that we can keep, I'm not reading them so we can keep moving. Next. Okay, the eligible use of funds. Remember, this is a grant program about COVID relief. So if what you want to do is plan a new big show and you're looking for funds for that, or to remodel your facility, this is not the correct grant program. This is COVID relief. And so the things that you spend the money on are about things tied back to COVID. And you can read all of the specifics here. The one thing to know for those of you used to some other grants, there is no specific grant period. Unlike SFOG, there is not a time frame upon which you can use the money. You can use the money. You can take as long as you need to spend the money, but it has to be spent on these specific things, and they all tie back in one way or another to COVID. And I think most of us also have plenty of debt and expenses from COVID. That shouldn't be a large problem. Also, you need to remember when spending the funds that you cannot double dip. So this needs to be expenses that weren't already covered by SFOG, that weren't already covered by California relief funds. You can't use the same expenses for multiple grant programs. Next. Okay, required documents. When you're filling out the application, there are documents they're going to ask you to upload. The first one is there is a specific certification document for this program. You will find it on the Cal Venues site. It has you attest to a whole bunch of things. And then you sign at the bottom saying you promise that those things are all true. So you can do that before you open the portal. You're going to go to the Cal Venues website. You're going to download it. You can do it digitally or with a hard copy. And there's instructions further in here, but that you can do before. Okay, business financials. These are your taxes. You're going to need a complete copy in a PDF of your 2019 federal tax returns, your 2019 California state tax returns, and the same thing for 2020. And again, you want all of those you want each one of those four things in a single PDF. You're going to need a government ID, which is either your driver's license or passport. You're going to want to make a copy of that, a JPEG, and in the case of your driver's license, you want both the front and the back. Interim financial statements, which this one confuses people sometimes. What this is profit and loss statements. And what they want is they want Q2, Q3, and Q4 for 2019. But instead of one P&L that covers all of those, they want you to make a P&L for Q2 and a P&L for Q3 and a P&L for Q4, and then combine them all in one big PDF. And then do the same thing for 2020. This is how they look at the loss amounts as opposed to looking at your overall income on your tax forms. You also have to you have to show that you have been in business since before June 1st of 2019. And so they're going to ask you for an origination document. One of these things listed here that shows that you have been in business since prior to June 1 of 2019. Don't ask me why that is the date. It's because, as you know, the legislation says so. And you don't have to have all of those things in the list. You just have to have one of them. For nonprofits, you need a copy of your IRS tax exempt letter. And then because everyone has to be current with the Secretary of State, they're going to want you to download evidence of your filing with the Secretary of State that shows that you were in existence prior to June 1st of 2019. Next. That's the application certification again. There's one for nonprofits and there's one for for-profits. So when you go to the website, make sure you're downloading the correct one. Next. Okay, I'm not going to walk through how to do this. The instructions are here. Come back, watch this, walk through the steps, but we're not going to do it right now. Okay, next. And it's going to show you how to do it electronically, and then it's going to show you how to do it by hand. Read it, love it, let's go. Next. And now they're just going to show you copies. We can go forward again, Eddie, of the various required documents. Keep going. So just in case you aren't sure what any of these things are, they have picture copies here to let you know. Next. Next. These are just all the different. And again, you don't have to have everything in the origination document. You just have to have at least one of them. Next. Next. Okay. This is more information about the NAICS code that we already talked about. I find the description on this to say review your NAICS code is a little confusing. What you want to do is not look at the NAICS website and figure out a NAICS code that would be good for you. You want to actually go to your taxes and see what the NAICS code is on those two taxes. There's a link here if you want to learn more about the NAICS system, but you want to look at your taxes, look at the list on pages 5 and 6 in this document, and make sure you are one of those NAICS codes. If you think you are eligible and you're not one of those on your taxes, email me and I can give you some, we can talk about what you might be able to do. Next. When you're filling out the application, use a valid email address. Also, an email address that is going to be monitored. The email address that you give them and the cell phone number that you sign up with, those are the information conduits. So do not use an email that is monitored by perhaps the owner of the organization that travels for 6 months every year and never checks his email. Make sure that the emails are coming to someone who will monitor them and respond to them. In particular, their system does not like info@emails. So if that's what your email is, your main email that you use, come up with a different one. Next. Prepare your document. You know, this to me is very obvious and should be simple logic. The people that are looking at these documents are going to have to look at hundreds of these applications. You want them to be your friend. You want to make their life as easy as possible. If you use your cell phone and take a squiggly ass, invisible picture of your articles of incorporation, that's not going to help them. When you make your PDFs of these various documents, open them before you submit them. Make sure they're legible. Make sure they're easy to read. Make the life of the reviewer as easy as possible. Next, there are also information on how big they can be, how you can name them. Read all of that. Persona. Okay. One of the realities of our world is that anytime a government program like this is done, one of the things the government has to be very concerned about is fraud. There are, unfortunately, in the world, lots of people that try to fraudulently get these monies. And so they make up people, they make up organizations. And so there are going to be some questions and processes in this that for many of you will feel uncomfortable, and you will be concerned about identity theft. And we have to find the Venn diagram space between our personal comfort zone and the state's need to make sure that there is no fraud going on. And that is why they ask for things like your driver's license. And one of the things they're going to do is there is a third-party vendor called Persona that actually verifies that the person in front of the computer is the person you are saying it is. And so the person that is the signer on this grant has to be an owner or an officer in the company. That person is going to have to be involved in the application, even if you are a larger organization, either for-profit or not-for-profit, who the owner, or in the case of a not-for-profit, the board president, isn't necessarily involved in the day-to-day. You need to have the person that is the signer on this be someone that is listed on the statement of information for your organization, and also is someone that can actively be involved, watching emails, listening to phone calls, and find a compromise between those two things. But the person that is the signer has to be present with you when the application is being submitted, because one of the things that you're going to do is show them your ID, and then they're going to have you either in the camera of your computer or the camera on your phone take a picture of you and show that the picture of the human matches the picture of the ID. We're not going to go through it here because it's one of those things that doesn't always work perfectly. So go into this portion of the application having taken a deep breath and being ready to relax and know that it might not work the first time. Make sure your picture that you are providing is a nice, clear picture. Okay, so read these best practices. It helps. Think about the background you're in front of, those kinds of things. Okay, next. This is taking you screen by screen so you know what to anticipate in the persona process. Next. Okay, there are some very specific tips that they give you here that make their computer system work better. Read them, take them seriously. I can't tell you how many people I have talked to who've had tech problems, and it's because they didn't do these things. Next, and there are several pages here where they take you step by step on how to do these things. Okay, keep going. I'm not going to do it here now. You take the guide and sit at your computer and try it before you apply. Keep going. Yep, keep going. Okay, where to apply? You're going to go to the Cal Venues grant website, which is where you can also get more information, the application guide and those kinds of things. And this is where you'll apply. If you have already applied for a previous either the California Relief Grant or the California Nonprofit Performing Arts Grant, you still have to start from scratch. You can use the same email that you have used before, but you need to set up a new account, start the portal, and proceed. Okay, next. Again, these are, it's walking you through how to create a portal. This is the email that you use to create this portal, and the phone that you use needs to be a cell phone that is going to be monitored, because every time you go to log into the portal, you need that cell phone with you, because it's going to send you a code to verify ID. So do not use a regular phone. Use a phone that gets text messages, and one that you will have access to if you are the person who's going to be monitoring and interacting with the portal. Next. Okay, these are the questions, the specific questions. Again, we're not going to go through all of these. If you are a nonprofit, understand that there is one application here for both. If it says owner, what that means for you is a board officer, somebody that's on your statement of information. And in larger organizations, that could also be for for-profits. If it's not necessarily the owner, is it someone who is a signer, who is legal, is legally listed as a signer on the statement of information. One thing to bear in mind here is the address system where you enter addresses. It will not take PO boxes, and it will not take its addresses are drawn from a post office database of some sort. So sometimes it hates your address. If that is the case, then you might need to use the address of the business as opposed to the resident. If you find that it is rejecting your address, then you can call the call center or email me, because there are some addresses, especially if it's a non-traditional address. If you live in an address where there's a house in front and a house in back, sometimes those confuse the system. Okay, but if that's what's hanging you up, don't freak out. Just call and get some help, because there's always a way around it. Okay, next. Now this is the information about the business. So the first is specifically about the owner, the signer. Yes, in fact, they are going to ask for, if it's your board president that is your signer, they're going to ask for their specific residential information and social security number and those kinds of things. Again, it's about preventing fraud. They're not trying to steal your identity. Okay, next. These are all pretty straightforward. A lot of the questions that are asked here are for demographic purposes. It doesn't matter the number of employees you had. It doesn't matter the number of jobs that are created. This is so the program can report back to the legislature and say, look at the great things that you did. The annual gross receipts for 2019, again, should match your tax form that is submitted. The amount requested is 20% of the annual gross receipts that are on your tax form. Next. Again, all of these, other than the NAICS code, the NAICS code is important. The rest of these are all demographic questions. Next. Now, for the eligibility requirements, they ask you a series of disclosure questions that are then yes or no answers. The first here about the venue is slightly confusing, and I think this is supposed to be changed so it's not an auto no. But for some people, if you are an organization that produces work, but you do it in a venue that someone else owns and operates, the venue is eligible and your organization is eligible, but you don't necessarily operate the venue. So if you have an issue here and you say no and it kicks you out because you're not the one operating the venue, contact me and we can work it out. Sometimes there are glitches in systems. Next. This is, again, all the individual requirements that we talked about on that page before. It's going to ask you, do you pay your performers? Are you a major league or professional sports team? Again, these should not be, if you say no to any of these, it should not be an automatic decline, because you don't have to be all of these things. You have to be different sets of them. So if you go through this portion and you automatically get kicked out, then email me and we'll see what we can do to help get it sorted out. The other thing that I will tell you as we're moving through here is, unlike, you will not get a printout of the application at the end. You don't get a PDF, you don't get a printout. If you want to keep a record of for your own reference of the ways that you answered, then take a screenshot of each page as you go through the application. That will be the only record that you have. The other thing that is true is you can't go backwards in the grant until you get to the end. The last thing you do before you submit is you have the opportunity to go back to the beginning and edit things as you come through. So don't worry if you can't go back to the previous page. You will be able to at the end. Next. Okay, this is the persona portion that we talked about actually in the application. So keep going. These are now the other disturbing thing is they're going to ask you for bank information. This is for two purposes. One is because this is how they pay the money out. They do not send you a check. They do a direct transfer. The other is this is another element of the fraud prevention. And so they use a third-party vendor called Plaid, which many banks are part of this Plaid system. And they're going to ask you for very concerning information, frankly. They're going to ask you for the name of your bank, and they're going to ask you for your online banking information. Because what they do is actually look into the bank. It's not Lendistry, it's a third-party vendor. There are some banks that do not participate in this system. So if you go in and your bank isn't there at all, there are ways to get through this if you have that problem. If you have done a Lendistry grant in the past and had trouble with this, email me before you apply and I can help you with those steps. I'm not going to go through it right now. But if you get hung up here and your bank is not represented, for example, my bank, Montecito Bank and Trust, is not, it's a small community bank. It's not part of the system. So there are other ways though that you can get through this. Okay, next. And this is where you're going to upload all those documents. It's going to ask you for each different thing. There are parameters for, how many documents. If there is anything about your document that you think at first blush is going to be confusing, again, help the people. If if there's something weird about your document that you think might confuse people, write a note, put it at the beginning, and include that in the PDF with your other document. Clarity never hurts. Next. Okay, so this is what I was talking about at the very end. You can review everything before you submit. Once you submit, you cannot get back into your application. They may contact you down the line and say, we want you to upload this new thing, or we have another question, but they have to reopen it before you can do that. If you need it reopened, you just call the call center or email me and I can put in a request to have it reopened for you. But once you've hit submit, if you then want to say, oh, wait, what did I say on that one question? You can't go back in and look at it. So again, if you're the kind of person that wants a record and wants to be able to look back at it, take screenshots as you go through. Next. So this is just talking about what you're going to get a confirmation email right afterwards. And if you don't get a confirmation email, then you probably should be concerned and should contact them, because that may mean that there was a problem with your email. Throughout this entire process, become very good friends with your junk mail, because sometimes the emails go there. Also, if you're the kind of person that doesn't answer your cell phone if you don't recognize the number, you're gonna want to get over that during this period, because it's not always the same phone number that the calls will come from. But if you are that person and they're leaving messages, don't be the person that doesn't check your voicemail. They will only try so many times and then they will move on. So the email and the voicemail and the cell phone are very important, and that they be monitored. Next. This is just talking again about the review process. Let's keep going. You can go, the gist is you can go back into the portal. You can't get into your application, but you can get into the portal and it should give you updates there. If you ever go into your portal and you get an update that seems strange or doesn't make sense, then you can call the call center or you can email me. As I mentioned before, do not consider this to be the end of your preparation. Read all of the words in the documents that we have given you, and go through the application before you start. If you're ready and you're prepared, this should take about 30 minutes. It's not a difficult process. It's just a very specific process. There are some kinks in the language. Understand, this is written to apply to a huge number of people. So if it says owner, and you are a not-for-profit, don't let these little things scare you or bump on them. We've talked about the rest of this stuff, so let's move on because I want to get so this is just the call center and some other useful links. Next. And there's the final nitty-gritty. It's got the call center information, it's got the website, it's got Californians for the Arts website, it's got my contact information, and of course a place where you can join Californians for the Arts. All right, so let's go to the Q&A. And is there really only one? We are a drum corps consisting of high school and college students. The majority of the performers pay to join the corps. We only have, okay, so that, oh, I see those, they've gone over to answers. For the answer for the drum corps is that no, paying to be in the corps is not the same as being a paid performer. So unfortunately, Kathleen, you are probably not eligible. Okay. Can a nonprofit that rents a facility apply for a grant? Yes, as long as the events that nonprofit does qualify as eligible events, and as long as the facility qualifies as an eligible facility. We received a grant in 2021. Are we eligible for another grant? If you received it in 2021, Peter, then you did not receive a Cal Venues grant because none of those were done in 2021. What you probably received was a California Relief Grant. So yes, you are eligible. What you will want to do, you need to remember that the amount of that California Relief Grant will be deducted from your grant amount. Do concert promoters qualify for this grant? Yes, as long as you meet, as long as the venue and the events meet all of the requirements, because you will see in the description for the eligibility, there is a list of things. It's do you present, produce, promote, etc. So just because you're a concert promoter does not mean you are disqualified. It also doesn't mean you qualify. You have to meet all the other, you know, you have to have the right NAICS code on your taxes, and the events have to meet all the other criteria. Let's scroll down. If you have a super flexible black box type space, does that count as a, yes, just because you're a black box space, you probably have risers. They don't have to be permanently affixed to the ground. But when you perform, and in most cases, do you still have a defined performance space and a defined audience space? We are a community orchestra that has performed till now local churches, but occasionally we perform 4 to 5 live concerts per year in a. Sorry, I'm just reading quickly. Yes, if you are, whatever you are performing in, whether it is at a church, whether it is outdoors, wherever you are performing, that performance space has to meet the eligibility requirements. And it doesn't, many organizations perform in numerous different venues during the year. As long as most of the venues that you perform in are eligible, then you should be fine. One of the things that we always say to people is don't self-edit. I mean, if you're absolutely sure you don't qualify, if you're a barbershop, don't apply. If you're a barbershop and occasionally, your cousin comes in and sings while they're getting their haircuts, no, you don't qualify, don't apply. But if you think, I probably do, I'm not really sure, err on the side of applying. It is, as long as you're telling the truth and you present your information in good faith, truthfully, there is no punishment for being declined. So if you are on the edge and you aren't really sure, because the industry is extremely diverse. It's lovely to think that we can say 4 or 5 cookie cutter things and that fits everybody in the industry. But the eligibility requirements for this grant are a strange combination of extremely precise and very broad. So err on the side of applying as opposed to self-editing. And then we've already done the drum corps. can we still, yes, this is unrelated to SFOG. If you got an SFOG grant, congratulations. You can absolutely apply. A thing to keep in mind, because I have a lot of times people say to me, well, I qualified for SFOG, so I'll definitely qualify for this, right? The two programs are completely unrelated. So if you run into trouble on the Cal Venues grant, it will not do you any good to tell anyone, but I got an SFOG grant. They are for the same industry. They are similar programs, but the actual requirements are completely different. And having either received or not received an SFOG grant has no impact here. Is that it, really? I was so fabulous that no one has any questions. Okay.
There's one more question.
Okay. Where did I miss it? Oh, open up there. Okay, I see. Oh, here they're coming. We do not pay performers or anyone else in a production event. Everyone works. No, unfortunately, Cindy, the performers have to be paid. And I have not seen, Patrice, correct me if I'm wrong, I have not seen any way around that. In SFOG, for example, if you were a not-for-profit and your staff was paid, then you didn't have to pay the performers. That is not the case for this grant. What is an SFOG grant, Martha? The SFOG grant was a Shuttered Venue Operators Grant. It was a federal grant program that was for specifically COVID relief. It was similar to this, but on a federal basis and with an even more complicated application process. It is now a closed program, so not to worry. You're fabulous. Oh, thank you, Angela. No, you do not have to deduct your SFOG. This is completely unrelated to SFOG. What you would deduct is your California Relief Grant. These are grants that started like in January of 2021. They ran through, there were several rounds of them. A couple of were specifically just cultural rounds. It was, again, through Lindustry. The one way to differentiate it from venues is the California relief grants were for a set amount. If your 2019 budget was between like 1,000 and 100,000, you got $5,000. And then in another big grant, you got $10,000. These grants are for all varying amounts. Okay. There we go. I'm going to put all the links in the chat one more time. Because, you know, I have them here. Why not? Again, the biggest things that I can say to you are keep my email. Lindustry has put together some great resources. Look back at the information we have here. Go to the website. Go through the pages of that application so you don't get surprised. Be aware of things like you are going to need the login information for your online banking. So if that's something that you don't normally have, this obviously is the company's online banking, not your personal online banking. You know, the more that you can start the application, go all the way through and finish it, the easier it is. You can stop and save and leave. One thing that I will recommend to you is don't stop in the middle of either the persona or the banking. If you do everything else and then you come to persona and you suddenly stop and go away, that sometimes causes glitches in the system because they think you're up to something. But you know, if you absolutely have to, if you get stuck in persona and you can't get it, both the persona step and the banking step, you actually have to complete before you can move on. And so if you are someone who your system, your banking system is not in Plaid, then you will have to either call or email and get some assistance on how to get through that, because it won't let you skip them. Okay, Patrice, have I forgotten anything else?
Nope, that's good.
Okay. Well, thank you all very much. if you think that you're eligible, I absolutely encourage you to apply. The reality is it's a big step forward for our industry to have the government recognizing that we need financial support. And one of the best ways to tell the government thank you is for the money to actually get used. So if you know of other organizations that you think might be eligible that have not applied, encourage them to do so. There are more of these webinars that will be happening up through the application day. So, and as I say, the recordings will all be on the Californians for the Arts website with links, and there's the schedule there for when the rest of the webinars are. Thanks for coming. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Let's see, is there anything new in here? Perfect. Oh, nice to see you, Deborah. Okay, thank you all. I will stay on for a minute in case anybody has anything else, but the rest of you, enjoy your day. Think about a membership in Californians for the Arts, and good luck with your applications. As you go through the process, if you run into trouble, please email me. It helps us to know what's going on, and hopefully I can give you a hand in sorting things out. Bye. All right. It's quiet. Any more? Those of you who are in the chat putting in that you need help, just go ahead and email me the details and we'll see what we can do to help you. Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.